for people who like dwell on their mistakes way too much, let's say you actually did make a big mistake and you got stacked, and you say, okay, that mistake was, let's say it was a blunder, like 10 big blinds. And I think it's common if your win rate is 4 big blinds, people will think, oh, well, I just wiped out my win rate for the next 250 hands just with that one mistake. So now I have to play another 250 hands just to get even in expected value before I can start making money. That's not actually how it works. But I do resonate a lot with what you said about tying your self-worth to your results and how that can really lead to a lot of performance anxiety. The amount that you tie your self-worth to, how good of a poker player you are is proportional to how much stress you're going to experience when you lose. So I think it's very good to recognize that. And that has helped me a lot with my performance anxiety too, is just really establishing that this one session, whatever the results are, it doesn't make me any better or worse of a poker player, even though my monkey brain really wants to say that a winning day is a good day and a losing day is a bad day. An understanding of variance can help with this a lot too, is just really establishing in your brain that whatever the results of this session are, it's basically just noise. You've got maybe a 55% chance of winning and a 45% chance of losing. And so it doesn't really make any sense to tie your self-worth to that. In fact, it's actually very stressful and unproductive to do that. I will say that the sort of doubt and the stress can be productive. Like you said, it seems like you understand that this is a motivating factor for you to improve. And so what is the alternative? Like, obviously it sucks that this is the way our brains work, that we have to feel these negative emotions in order to stimulate growth. But if the alternative is just that you never doubt yourself or any plays that you make, and you just like basically stagnate and never get any better, that's not good either. So I think a lot of players exist on this spectrum. I've got some players who are my students who they can just crush volume, but they also don't seem to have as much attention to detail. And they're not really as good at fixing leaks typically as the people on the other end of the spectrum who don't play as much volume, but focus on studying a lot, and they have a much stronger attention to detail, and they're always questioning their actions. So I think there's a sweet spot. And if you're on either end of the spectrum too much, I think you should do some work to get closer to the middle.
I definitely feel like when for example, I studied a lot in poker in my CFP for, I think, about 2 years. After that, when I started to play, because I became so conscious of all the possibilities and that the correct quote answer was really dependent on either this, either that. I remember when I would play, it was so overwhelming in terms of, well, I see this spot. Well, I can do this, I can do that. Well, this would be the best play depending on this. I sort of, it sounds a bit weird, but I sort of knew too much, and therefore I knew actually nothing in terms of I couldn't perform because there was just way too much stuff going on inside my head. So sort of also accepting and we will actually I want to actually talk about this topic in a second, like defining what your strategy is and sort of deciding on one route that you're going to take instead of being in a situation, well, there's various routes that I can take. Like off game work, I think it has definitely benefits because you're very open-minded and you can look at various possibilities. So you will see lines or strategies that the other person might not see. But if you don't decide before you play what your extra strategy is going to be, it can bite you in the ass when you start playing. I think also what you mentioned is interesting, like players who have more eye for detail. Let's say, for example, you play a session of 2 hours, you have 2 of your students, both that you just described. One guy might have identified 5 mistakes, or one have identified 5 mistakes, where the other one who has more attention to detail might have identified 15. And maybe after 2 hours, he's like, well, I've identified 15 mistakes. I want to quit my session. I want to look at those mistakes. Where the other guy's just like, well, I've only made 5 mistakes and they were not so big. So he can just basically continue playing. Do you feel like that's something that could be going on?
Yeah. And honestly, I think probably the people who are easier on themselves have better chances of being successful in poker, because a lot of the success in poker just comes from longevity. And as long as there are recreationals in your game, you're going to be profitable in that game. Like you said, you feel self-conscious about playing if you didn't sleep well the night before. Probably that doesn't have as big of an impact if you're sitting at a table with one recreational player. You're probably going to be profitable in that game. I don't know what your win rate is, Rene, but let's say it's like 7 big blinds per 100 or 8 big blinds per 100. I don't think it's going to go negative down to negative 3 big blinds per 100 just because you didn't sleep well that night.
It sounds like it sounds like exactly what Jared Tendler told me back then. He says, no, you have to implement. He said, you see things too black as white. You either say that you're a crusher or you're a losing player. There's something in the middle as well, he told me.
Yeah, definitely.
But the interesting point he also said, he said, so you're saying that because you slept bad, that you're not going to perform well. But every time you sleep bad, you don't play. How do you know that you're going to perform bad if you never play when you don't sleep? And I was like, good point. So I remember it was the same. For example, let's say you take a holiday break and afterwards you come back. I would need like a week at least to feel like a week of sort of preparation to feel like, okay, I can perform again, right? And again, he said the same thing. He said, how do you know? He actually said, and this is actually good advice for people listening as well, when you come back for your holiday, it's actually the perfect time to just jump in and see what your C game looks like. Because they will point you out exactly the most important areas for your game to improve. So I made a very big mind shift, both in the sleep at some point and also with the breaks. I would jump in, aligning expectations, majorly important. Because if you expect to play your A game, guess what? You're going to get frustrated because most likely you're not. Whereas if you expect to play your C game, you actually might be surprised that you might actually start playing your A game. It's your expectation going in will really determine how your session is going to be. If you're going to say, listen, I'm going to be very rusty, I expect the minimum, and the minimum comes up, it's like, well, that was expected. If you perform a little bit better than the minimum, you're like, I'm pleasantly surprised with how things went today. So I think aligning expectations is very important. And another thing that I think is very important that helped me a lot was, instead of tracking outcome, like you said, obviously detaching your self-worth from the results, very important, which actually also, maybe you can also relate to this. I usually ask this also as coaches, especially when I started to get coaching and started to go a bit more in the public. This is why I said mental game problems, somehow they always chase me. Every time a situation changes, a new problem comes up. It's very annoying. But so I started to put myself out there, just like you, right, as a coach. And then suddenly I started to notice that if I would be on a downswing, it would suddenly influence me way more, because I felt like I needed to win to have credibility. And that kind of became like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because like, oh shit, I haven't been winning over the last 20K hands, 40K hands, whatever. I'm not running so well. And then I started to play and I wanted to win, because the winning was tied to sort of my credibility as a coach. So then what happens? Well, your performance pressure increases, right? Your performance anxiety before you jump in your session increases, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you're going to choke because the winning becomes too important to you. So as you can see, mental game, it's an annoying thing. But what I wanted to say, and now I'll hand it over to you. So instead of tracking your results, but like I said, I found this more easily when it was just me, because the outer world, if I show a graph where I'm break even in 100K hands, everyone is going to be like, and if I say variance, then everyone's going to be like, you just suck, blah, blah, blah. How can you coach? Or at least that's the story that you tell in your head. Obviously, the reality is way different. But to, instead of results, track like certain KPIs, like you already mentioned, right? I do exactly the same. I look at my game. I identify certain leaks. I'll write like stat goals. I usually like to give like bronze, silver, gold. So let's say my river fold is 55. I want to get it to 50. I write down, okay, it's now 55. The aim is 50. That's the gold aim. I'll give 51 for silver and 52 for bronze or something. I'll do that for all the stats. And then after my session, I'll load in a filter, face river bet. So after my session, I'll look at these hands. Because like you cannot look at river fold after your session, because there's, let's say you played 1,000 hands, river fold says nothing. So after the session, I'll look at the actual hands to see if I'm applying it correctly. And then after the month, I will look at my actual stat. And that way, if you have certain focus point for your session, and after your session is done, you just evaluate your session or how your session went based on, did I do what I set out to do? Did I focus on my focus points? If the answer is yes, then who cares about the short-term result of the session? But you need to track something. I feel like if you don't track KPIs or you don't look at your results, yeah, you're gonna want to see something, right? And then most people grab for the graph, and then basically you're putting how you've done, you're putting in the hands of the poker gods and the short-term variance. That seems like a problem.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And one other mindset shift that I've used for people who like dwell on their mistakes way too much. I think it's common, like let's say you sit down for a session and you get stacked really early in the session. And let's say you actually did make a big mistake and you got stacked. And you say, okay, that mistake was, let's say it was a blunder, like 10 big blinds. And I think it's common if your win rate is 4 big blinds per 100, people will think, oh, well, I just wiped out my win rate for the next 250 hands just with that one mistake. So now I have to play another 250 hands just to get even in expected value before I can start making money. That's not actually how it works. Your win rate, your mistakes that you have made historically are built into your win rate already. So if your win rate is 4, that is the sum of all of the good plays you've made and the bad plays that you've made. So I think it's a lot more productive to go into your session understanding that nobody plays perfectly and that you are going to make a lot of mistakes and that you have made mistakes in the past. So you're going to continue probably to make mistakes. The only thing that you can really try to do is just make smaller mistakes and fewer mistakes in the future. But you're always going to make mistakes, and the fact that you make a mistake in a session is not going to be the thing that turns you from a winning player into a losing player. And the absolute worst thing that can happen for your EV if you're a winning player is that you get knocked out of the game completely because of these mindset leaks. Like you burn out and you just stop playing. Well, now your EV just went from 8 big blinds to 0. And that's actually the worst thing that can happen. The odds that you're going to be losing in games, unless you have really poor game selection, are very, very low. Maybe you'll go from 8 to 5 or 6 if you're playing on a bad day or at a time where you don't really feel like you can be playing your A game. But yeah, longevity is super important, and the ability to just put in that volume, because the fact is there are recreationals playing and there's a lot of free money floating around, and a major part of your job as a poker player is to just be there to get that money, that free money when it's there.
Just show up.
And to not go crazy in the process.